Alright, so let's start. So the first faction is Rome. So basically, Rome is the faction that the game is based off of, obviously. As is the tradition with all factions that are the main focus of a game, Rome is very strong and does not have a lot of noticeable drawbacks. Rome is the perfect faction for new players. Even if you're not new to the Total War series, start off with Rome to learn how the game works. The Romans' main strength comes from their very heavy armored melee units, especially the legionaries, who will most likely make up the bulk of your army. Legionaries are legionaries, legionary cohort, and sometimes armored legionaries, as you can see. Carrying on. Because they rely on very heavy units, it may be a good idea to invest in lighter units in other places, such as skirmishers or cavalry. When I say lighter, I mean like sometimes bringing Praetorian cavalry isn't the best of ideas. Sometimes you'll want to bring auxiliary cavalry. Sometimes you'll want to bring Succi Equites. Sometimes you want to bring legionary cavalry. Sometimes you want to bring Equites. Also, for the skirmishing, in the skirmishing field, it doesn't matter which skirmisher unit you bring because they're all light. However, I do not recommend bringing levies unless you don't have enough money to get velites, because levies don't have the same javelins or the same morale and are very prone to routing. If you can, always try to go for the auxiliaries, unless you want to spend more money for your melee infantry, in which case velites are fairly good. Rome's auxiliaries, such as the Syrian archers or the Balearic slingers or the auxiliary cavalry, do this for them. Basically, auxiliary cavalry are heavy but are quite useful and better than legionary cavalry. They are heavy and legionary cavalry are medium, meaning that they do more mass impact damage. The Balearic slingers and Syrian archers enable Rome to engage at longer ranges, both of which have 150 range. Numidian cav are great for harassing enemy cav or elephants and perhaps making them run amok into their own lines. Now, Numidian cavalry is pretty good. Carthage has them too. I would not bring them myself because they do not support my game style. And I don't play as Rome a lot anymore. I did play as them a few times when I was trying to get a few replays for them. But besides that, I don't play as Rome a lot because they're too easy, honestly. Of course, Rome does have its drawbacks. Relying too much on very heavy infantry makes you much more immobile than the barbarians who can use this as an opportunity to flank and hit your rear. Relying too much on auxiliaries or lighter units makes your army less able to hold off attacks, something that the Hellenic factions will use to their advantage. Also, one must take into consideration their melee defense. Overall, it is average, but unlike other factions, Rome cannot boost it using abilities, unless of course you have the Caesar and Gaul DLC. On average, the melee defense of most units is about 48. Hastati have 48, Legionaries have 48, Principes have 53, Legionary Cohort have 48, 52, 48, 48, 58, 51, 60, 55, 55. And then 64 for the Triarii. With Caesar and Gaul, the ability that Caesar has is Loyalty of the 10th, which boosts your melee defense by 20. Presence just increases or decreases the recharge rate of your ability by a full minute or 60 seconds. So their biggest disadvantage is when they are separated. You'll see why mainly if you play the historical battle, the Teutoburg Forest. Now, in the Teutoburg Forest historical battle, you are basically, if I can get it up, basically the description is, after a summer spent campaigning north of the Rhine, the Roman commander Publius Quintilius Varus, was moving his troops to winter quarters in Roman territory. However, he did not know that his right-hand man, German-born Arminius, had built an alliance of tribes against him. Arminius led Varus into an ambush in the dense Teutoburg forest. What happens in this battle is Arminius has control of your auxiliaries, and you are left with purely Roman units, including 3 Eagle cohort, which you have to get out of the forest. It's almost impossible to keep all of your units alive, and your main goal is to keep your Eagle cohorts alive by almost all means necessary. Now, I've done this battle like about 3 times, but it didn't register because I think the game crashed on me. But it's a very tough battle, and it really shows like the weakness of Rome. The Romans can frontally like deal with like a lot of units, especially the barbarian ones, but when it comes to them being separated, there's just no chance at all. So the Romans work best as an army. Just keep that in mind whenever you're playing as them in multiplayer. Rome works best as an army, but when they are separated, the divide and conquer principle comes into effect. Rome is less likely to capitulate if their enemies can be kept at the front, with the exception of pikemen. When you try to charge a unit that is not in front of you, your line starts to break, and that unit that most likely has bad melee defense will get hit a lot. Basically, I'm talking about legionaries, because they are your mainline unit most of the times. They cost 660 talents, have 80 armor, 48 melee defense, and 47 melee attack. Quite balanced, but you know, if they get hit in the flank, it's game over for them. To summarize, a pro-Roman player is a danger to all, but somebody that knows Rome's weakness can beat somebody that does not. In my opinion, Rome beats Rome's roster, straight up beats RDA, Pontus, and Epirus. However, this is just based off of my knowledge of the game, my knowledge of the rosters, my knowledge of each faction's gameplays, and the Romans lose to Parthia, Nomads, and Seleucids. Now just keep in mind how I'm picking one or 3 factions from a culture, and then saying that, you know, that's what they beat, and then another 1 or 3 from another culture and saying that's what they lose to. In my opinion, Rome can beat one faction out of each culture, and they lose to one faction out of each culture. This has not been tested, or this has been tested rather, but there could be more testing done to support this claim. So before I jump into the next review, because I will be uploading this to YouTube, usually what people like to bring as the Romans is a general and bodyguard. Your core can either consist of legionaries or legionary cohort. Legionary cohort costs 40 more talents, but they have 10 more armor. It's pretty useful when you're going up against the Gauls to have legionary cohorts, because the Gauls have high weapon damage themselves, and that can be very detrimental to low armored units. You can even bring Socii Extraordinari, but people usually don't. Most of the times when you see a Roman player, they'll usually bring Evocati cohort. Evocati cohort is not a good core unit because they're too expensive. I would never recommend doing it unless you're playing on ultra funds. Even then, you know, it's kind of meta to bring Evocati cohort and armored legionaries. When you're starting off a game, you can go as meta as you want, but when you get used to the game, try not to go meta, because it doesn't really look good on you, especially if you go into tournaments. I prefer veteran legionaries over Evocati cohort because even though they have 5 less armor and 2 less melee attack, they are slightly cheaper, and sometimes that the talents that I save from getting this unit is a bit better than like when I say better, I can spend it somewhere else. I usually don't use Hastati, and people almost never bring Soki Hastati. I did bring these guys once and they were very useful to me. However, Hastati is better. So if you can, go for Hastati. People usually don't bring spears. If they do, they'll bring Triari, because Triari are very sturdy. However, most of Rome's gameplay revolves around their melee infantry. If you can have a melee heavy core, but of course you do need to support your infantry with cavalry. You have 5 melee cav units, 1 shock cav unit which you can use for hammer and anvil tactics, or frontal charges against unprepared factions or players. And you have missile cav. Again, I don't use Numidian cavalry a lot, but they do have their uses. Legionary cavalry are pretty good. Soki Equites are better. They are heavy, and so they're a bit slower than Legionary cav, but they have a better charge bonus and better melee attack. They just have less armor. Auxiliary cav are the cav units that I like to bring the most though, because they are heavy but have good melee attack, a pretty good charge bonus. Weapon damage is the same across the entire roster except with Praetorian cavalry, which I usually don't bring. And they're just really good unit for the Romans. They allow the Romans to like win battles that they'd probably lose in some situations. And then of course you have your dogs, which are very useful against skirmishers, somewhat useful against horse skirmishers, especially the ones that like to run away. But I use them mostly against skirmishers who are not good in melee and can outrun infantry units. I did bring an elephant once to battle and it actually paid off for me, but most of the times you won't need elephants. You'll just be relying mainly on your melee infantry. So I'm going to take a quick 2-minute break and I'll see you guys then, and we'll go right into Carthage.